The last night I ever saw my father alive, the garage light was on. That yellow bulb had been glowing on the side of the house for as long as I could remember. It hummed softly through the summers of my childhood, flickered through the autumn rains, burned steady through every winter storm. It was like our family's heartbeat, quiet, stubborn, and always there. I grew up in a small town in Indiana, where nights smelled like gasoline and cut grass. My dad was a mechanic, the kind who never threw anything away. The garage was his temple, full of half-fixed engines, coffee cans of bolts, and radios that only played old country songs. Every evening, even after dinner, he'd wander out there, wipe his hands on a rag, and just stay. When I was little, I'd sit on a stool in the corner, watching him work. The light from that single bulb cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. I think that's where I learned that silence isn't empty, it's full of things we don't know how to say. My mum used to joke that Dad loved that garage more than her. He'd laugh, but there was a truth hiding in there somewhere. The garage was where he felt like himself, not a husband, not a provider, just a man with tools and purpose. By the time I turned 16, I started hating that light, because every time I came home late from a party or a girl's house, I'd see it shining, like an eye waiting to catch me. I knew he was out there, probably pretending to tinker with something while rehearsing what he'd say when I walked in. We fought a lot in those years, mostly about nothing, grades, curfews, the kind of music I listened to. But underneath, it was always about the same thing. He wanted me to be him, and I wanted to be anyone but him. I left for college in 1993. The night before I left, we stood in the driveway, the yellow garage light glowing between us. I remember the smell of oil and the sound of cicadas. He handed me his old wrench, the one he'd used since high school, and said, "Every man should know how to fix something, even if it's just himself." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. When I came back 4 years later, everything was quieter. Mum said he'd been getting slower, more tired. The garage still looked the same tools, same smell, but he didn't spend as much time there. He'd sit in his chair by the window and stare at that light like it was the last friend he had. One evening, I went out there to grab a box of my old stuff. He was sitting on a stool, not working, just holding the spark plug between his fingers. He looked at me and said, "Funny thing about light. You don't notice it until it's gone." I didn't understand then. I do now. 2 weeks later, he collapsed in the driveway. Heart attack. By the time the ambulance came, the garage light was still on, flickering in the dusk. At the funeral, I stood outside with a cigarette, staring at the house. The porch light was off. The windows were dark. But that damn garage light, it was still shining, like he'd forgotten to leave. I thought about turning it off. I didn't. After Dad's funeral, Mum sold the house. She said it was too big for one person, too full of ghosts. I took the wrench he gave me and a box of old photographs. I told myself I wouldn't look back. I moved to Chicago, got a job at an auto parts company. It paid well enough, though I never cared much about the work. Every morning I'd wake up before sunrise, drink my coffee in silence, and drive through streets still half asleep. Sometimes I'd pass by repair shops, those old brick ones with metal roll-up doors, and I'd catch a glimpse of a single light shining inside. And every time, I'd feel that same pull in my chest. I got married at 34. Lisa was patient, kind, the kind of woman who believed in small joys, Sunday pancakes, long walks, handwritten notes. For a while, I thought I'd finally learned how to be happy. But life has a way of wearing you down in quiet ways. We couldn't have kids. We tried for years, doctors, tests, treatments, until the hope turned to something heavier. Something that sat between us at dinner and followed us into bed. I started spending more time at work, taking extra shifts, just so I wouldn't have to sit in that silence. Lisa said once, "You disappear when you're hurting." She was right. I did. One night, about 10 years into our marriage, she packed a suitcase. There wasn't a big fight, just a long look, a small nod, and the sound of the door closing. I watched her car lights fade down the street, and for the first time in a long while, I realized how quiet my life had become. That night, I dreamt of the garage. It wasn't the way I remembered. The light was brighter, almost blinding. My father stood under it, wiping his hands on a rag, smiling like he used to when I was a kid. He didn't say anything, but I could feel what he meant. "You're fixing everything but yourself." I woke up at 3:17 a.m., sweating, heart racing. I went outside just to breathe. The street was dark, the city asleep, but across the alley, in someone's backyard, a single light glowed, pale and yellow, just like ours used to. And for the first time in years, I cried. 20 years after Dad died, I drove back to Indiana. Mom had passed 5 years earlier, and I hadn't visited since the funeral. But something in me, maybe that dream, maybe the silence, told me I needed to see the old house one more time. When I turned onto our street, my breath caught in my throat. The house looked smaller, older. The paint was peeling, the fence was gone. But the garage, it was still there. Same shape, same crooked roofline. And above the door, faint but steady, that yellow light still burned. I pulled over. Just sat there staring. My hands were shaking. The logical part of me said someone else must have replaced the bulb. Maybe the new owners kept it for convenience. But deep down, I knew. Some things don't belong to reason. I walked up the driveway. The gravel crunched under my boots exactly like it used to. I could almost hear Dad's voice, smell the oil and dust. I reached up, touched the metal light fixture. It was warm. And in that moment, I swear I heard him whisper, "Every man should know how to fix something, even if it's just himself." I stood there in the cold, under that flickering bulb, and time folded in on itself. The air smelled the same oil, dust, and rain-soaked earth. My breath came out in small clouds, but my chest felt warm, like the light was burning inside me too. I wanted to go inside the garage, but I hesitated. It wasn't mine anymore. The thought hit me hard, how life moves on, how the things that built us eventually belong to someone else. Still, I took a few steps closer, peered through the small window in the side door. Inside, I saw shelves lined with jars and tools, a workbench in the same spot it always was. But what caught my eye was a single item hanging on the wall, my father's old wrench. The one he'd given me. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. I had that wrench. It was sitting in a box back home in Chicago. But there it was, plain as day, gleaming under the yellow light. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't about the wrench. It wasn't even about the light. It was about the things we leave behind, pieces of ourselves that keep shining, even when we're gone. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass and whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. Sorry for not calling enough. Sorry for trying so hard to be different. Sorry for not understanding that love doesn't always sound like love." I don't know how long I sat there. Time didn't matter. The storm outside had stopped, and through the window I could see the first light of dawn creeping in. The yellow bulb was still glowing, but softer now, blending with the sunrise. I whispered, "Thanks, Dad," and turned it off. For the first time in decades. But as I walked away, the sun broke over the horizon, and the whole street lit up. And I realized the light never really went out. It just moved. I drove home that morning with the sun rising behind me. The road was empty, and for the first time in years, I didn't rush. The light through the windshield felt different, softer, calmer. When I got back to Chicago, the house felt strange. It wasn't lonely anymore, just quiet, like it was waiting for me to notice it. I unpacked the box of old photos and the wrench my dad gave me. I wiped the rust off the handle and hung it on the wall above my desk. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the neighborhood lights blink on one by one. Across the street, an older man was showing his grandson how to fix a bicycle chain. It made me think of Dad and me, how the world keeps repeating itself, quietly teaching the same lessons to new hands. The next morning, I cleaned my own garage, swept the dust, threw out what didn't matter, and built a small workbench. I didn't even know what I was going to fix. I just knew I needed a place to start. By evening, ID found an old radio in the attic. I plugged it in. Static. Then, faintly, a station came through, old country songs, just like my father's garage. It felt like coming home, even though I never left. Over the months, that garage became my refuge. Sometimes I'd tinker with small things, a clock, a toaster, an old watch. It made me feel connected to my father, to the world, to myself. One evening, the boy across the street came over. He held a broken skateboard. "Sir," he said shyly, "my wheel came off." My grandpa said, "You know how to fix things." I smiled. "I might." We fixed it together. When we finished, he grinned and said, "It's like new." I laughed. Everything can be fixed if you care enough. That night, I turned off the radio and stood there in the quiet. The light above me flickered once, and for a moment, I could almost hear my dad's laugh again. It's been 3 years since that night in Indiana. 3 years since I stood under that yellow light and felt my father's presence. For the first time in decades, the garage here in Chicago looks different now, brighter, fuller. Not because I changed the bulb, but because I changed the way I see it. There are tools neatly hung on the wall, a radio that hums in the corner, and that old wrench, still gleaming like it's waiting to be used. Every Sunday morning, I open the door, let the sunlight spill in, and work on something small, a lamp, a clock. Sometimes just a cup of coffee and a few minutes of quiet. It's not about fixing things anymore. It's about remembering how to keep the light on, even when life feels dark. Sometimes, late at night, you'll step outside before bed. The neighborhood is quiet, the air heavy with the scent of rain and cut grass. And across the street, I can see the faint glow from my own garage light. It spills gently onto the driveway, soft, steady, familiar. It reminds me that love isn't loud. It doesn't always shout or demand attention. Sometimes it's just a light left on, a sign that someone, somewhere, still believes you'll find your way home. When I was younger, I thought strength was silence, keeping everything inside. Now I know it's the opposite. Strength is letting yourself feel. It's sitting in the dark until you can see again. And sometimes, it's just flipping on a light, for no other reason than to say, "I'm still here." I think that's what my father was trying to tell me all those years, not through words, but through the way he lived. He never talked much about love. He didn't have to. He built it with his hands, kept it alive with a simple act, leaving the light on. Now I do the same. Every night, before I go to bed, I walk out to the garage. I turn on that yellow light, and as I stand there, looking at the glow against the dark sky, I whisper, "I made it home, Dad." To everyone listening right now, if you've ever lost someone, if you've ever carried regret or wished for one more chance, maybe this story is yours too. Maybe there's a garage light somewhere in your memory still burning. Don't ignore it. Don't run from it. Go back to it. Touch it. Let it remind you that the people who shaped us never really leave. They just change form into warmth, into silence, into light. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story touched you even a little, give it a like and subscribe to the channel, because maybe next time my voice, my story, won't show up in your search. And I'd really love for us to meet again. End.